Всім привіт.
Привіт.
Вітаю.
Доброго дня.
Hello.
Nice to see you, all of you, dear participants, dear speakers. Well, glad to see and hear you in such specific days nowadays. And today in Ukraine, you know, we just have maybe in 1 hour or 2 hours, it depends upon the city, our attacks. So yeah, let's discuss so important topics today about disinformation, about the role of media here. And I'm glad to introduce you our speakers today for such I expect interesting discussion today. It's Ilya Kabachynskyi from AIN.UA, editor-in-chief, and Svitlana Slipchenko from Vox. Dears, the screen is yours. After your interview, I will be ready to moderate all Q&A about your discussion and further questions about 1991 Media Hackathon, if you have that. So, guys, Ilya, Svitlana, please.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Hello to everyone. Well, I'm ready to start. Ilya, nice to meet you. I hope we will have a really fruitful discussion today.
Yes, I hope so too. Thank you for the invitation. Nice to meet you too, and nice to meet everyone who is joining us today. So let's start. Is everyone hear me? Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Our topic today is fake news. So I think it's important to start how Ukraine resist fake news from Russia and how Ukraine resisted before 2402.
I think that we definitely are winning on the informational front line because there is almost no opportunities for Russian disinformation to attack Ukrainians with any really viral or harmful fakes and disinformation. On my humble opinion, it's maybe only Telegram that still can spread a lot of disinformation cases and huge disinformation narratives because there are no moderation on Telegram at all. If we compare with other social media platforms like Facebook or Twitter, you know there is a really strong moderation there. There are fact-checking program on Facebook and Instagram. It's also a kind of fact-checking on Twitter and some restrictions on YouTube. So maybe the Telegram is still a really harmful social media platforms for Ukrainians, if not to use any rules of media literacy. Also, I would suggest that some news media outlets can sometimes spread not fakes, but maybe a kind of misinformation narratives and misinformation cases, because it was not an intention to spread fakes, not an intention to harm Ukrainians, but only like a mistake that can make any person, including even fact checkers. But if we look on the sociology pools, like the last pool made by USAID and Internews, they asked respondents to qualify 3 facts, whether they are truth or false. And unfortunately, only 13% of respondents answered correctly to all of the 3 facts. It's much worse than on previous year because then we had 24%, if I'm not mistaken, of those who perfectly qualified each fact. I suppose that these mistakes were probably made, first of all, because of some kind of infodemic like we had in 2020 and in previous year also, when we have so much information with so much sources of information, and it's sometimes really hard to understand whether we see the truth or it's false, or it's a kind of manipulation or a part of disinformation of Russia, or it's a misinformation. It's really hard sometimes. The other point why people a little bit worse with fact-checking now, maybe because of stress, because we still are under this all war situation. Sometimes it's really hard to be concentrated on analyzing information. It's even hard to work for journalists, for fact-checkers under these circumstances, what to say about the other people. But in general, everything that is done now on the informational front line is really significant. First of all, we have a strong collaboration between government, non-governmental organization, international companies like Meta, Google. We all are now working on the same stage. We are all working with the same topics, and we all do all the best to enhance the media literacy of Ukrainians, their fact-checking skills, their ability to fact-check information, and even their access to the official sources of information.
Sorry, it's blackout right now in my office, but I hope to launch some. Person is back. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's all on this question. So my rating to the fact-checking efforts and to what is going on with fighting disinformation is really high. So I'm sure that we are doing on each stage, on personal, on journalistic stage, on NGO, on government, on international, all the best to fight disinformation. And what is even more important, that some international abroad organization, I would say abroad journalists, abroad fact-checking organization, are really interested in our practice now on how to identify Russian hostile narratives and sources of information, and which methods are the best to fight them, not only in Ukraine, but also in their countries.
But, sometimes I realize that I live in some bubble when everyone is very well educated, have like opportunities to get some knowledges from international media, from some like media like Vox. And what about smaller cities? What about like fact-checking in like Sumy, maybe some Kherson or Mykolaiv, smaller city? What about this front?
I have totally the same feeling that the most of people around me, they are totally understand what is disinformation, which narratives are hostile, where is the truth, and even how to check the information. But when sometimes I talk to the people who don't read such news medias as Novaya Vremya or Liga or Forbes, or who don't read Vox or any international media, who don't know even anything about what could be a disinformation, I hear from them some narratives that were previously spread by Russian disinformation. Not only this year, but even years before, because as you might know that all the narratives that are used by Russian propaganda now were, they started much years before the full-scale war. If we talk about local fact-checking, actually we had such thing as a local fact-checking organization. For instance, it's Gwara Media in Kharkiv. They do not only local fact-checking in Kharkiv region, but also a kind of national fact-checking. We also have project Brehunets in Lutsk region. They are also trying to fact-check not only local news, but also national spread fakes and some kinds of fraud even. Also, we have some smaller local news media outlets who sometimes share the fact-checking made by VoxCheck, by StopFake, by Detector Media. So we see that sometimes if this topic is really connected with this region, with this city, the local media can share our articles and spread the fact-checking. But actually, local fact-checking is not widespread in Ukraine at all. And I suppose it's a good way for our development in the nearest future to train as much as possible local organizations, or even create like affiliates of big fact-checking organization in other regions, and improve their fact-checking skills there. It might be important because sometimes we have this local specific that is hard to be fact-checked when you in Kyiv, when you are not in Mykolaiv or somewhere else. That is why it's sometimes good to be on the place where something happens to check the facts much better.
Let's look on the other side. What about spreading Russia propaganda about war in Ukraine, about Russia in Europe and in the US? Because we can see that lots of misinformation are spreading around international media, and when like BBC or Reuters writes crisis in Ukraine, it looks very funny.
Yeah, I'm also feel really angry when I see this crisis in Ukraine used not only by international media, but even some international organizations. Unfortunately, it's a point where we should work on a lot in the nearest time. As for the disinformation abroad, we have a project where we analyze Russian disinformation about Ukraine in 6 European countries. It's Germany, Italy, Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Hungary. And we see that all these countries are much affected by Russian disinformation. Maybe Poland is one of the most affected countries. It's unexpectedly, because previously we thought that Italy is one of the most affected, but now we see that Poland is much targeted by Russian disinformation. And we also sometimes review the reports from European Digital Media Observatory. They do monthly reports about disinformation in all European countries, and they analyze at least 3 big topics, which can include some disinformation cases. It's first of all war in Ukraine, it's also COVID-19 and climate change. And if we look at the dynamics on how much cases were collected since 21st of February until maybe the end of November, it's the latest available data, we will see that, of course, it was a kind of explosion of disinformation about Ukraine in March, in April, in February also. But then since May till August, until even September, the number of disinformation cases of Ukraine declined, and we saw less and less cases about Ukraine in foreign medias, including those medias who are spreading only Russian disinformation, because we are trying to analyze those media in our countries of focus. And then after October, in October and November, we saw another explosion of disinformation in these countries. But actually, I think that these trends are really connected with what's happening on the front line, what's happening in Ukraine at all. And when these attacks on energy infrastructure started, then we saw a new explosion of disinformation. Now it's mostly connected with that Ukraine is a kind of terrorist state, that Ukrainian authorities are care only about themselves. That is why they are continue to sell electricity abroad, and Ukrainians has no electricity now. We also see that there are a kind of new explosion of fakes about Ukrainian army atrocities and war crimes on deoccupied territories. And basically Russia called it's only fakes created by Ukrainian propaganda to blame Russia in some war crimes, but all these crimes were actually made by Ukrainian armed forces. And in most of these cases, in almost all of these cases, of course, Russian propaganda has absolutely no proofs for that, only some altered photos and videos, or photos or videos used out of context that cannot prove anything. So I suppose that in the nearest months, the number of disinformation about Ukraine in Europe can continue its increase because we see a really important dynamic on the front line. We see the occupation of south of Ukraine. We see sometimes positive, sometimes negative signals from east of Ukraine. All these can be then retranslated by Russian disinformation also abroad. But the other interesting point that narratives that Russia use for its audience in Russia, for Ukrainian audience, and for European audience are almost the same. The difference only with speakers, with pseudo-experts, with medias who spread it with some words, but generally narratives are the same. And it's mostly narratives about Ukraine as a terrorist state, about Ukrainian armed forces, war crimes and atrocities. Now it's electricity, of course. And sometimes we still see some narratives that sanctions are more harmful for Europe than for Russia, and that European authorities are mostly care about Ukrainian refugees than about their citizens. This narrative may be the most harmful for European audience because it really impacts their feelings, their routine life. But this narrative was popular in the middle of autumn, and it's not much popular this month.
You know, I think sometimes international media even don't understand that they spread disinformation. Very simple case. In a good media, you need to ask two sides of everything. So when like Russia attacks Ukrainian energy infrastructure, some Reuters or BBC prepare an article when they ask some Ukrainian governmental, and he say, yes, what's distractions in our energy infrastructure. And then this Reuters reporters goes to Peskov and asks him opinion, and Peskov says, no missiles for civil infrastructure, only military points, and Reuters write it down. And I think it's they need to change something the way they work, because it's also about spreading misinformation, disinformation.
Yeah, mostly it's about misinformation. I think it's not about disinformation for something that was spread to harm Ukraine, but it's about misinformation when journalistic standards can just harm Ukrainian positions on their international field. Sometimes I think the problem not only with this like journalistic standards, but also with that international journalists don't know what's happening in Ukraine, don't know details. They don't know much context, what was happening before, what's happening now. They don't have much access to any possible sources of information inside Ukraine. The official position sometimes is not enough to provide journalists with enough proofs that some attack or atrocity was done by Russia, and they can they could be not sure whether it's only Russia who must be blamed in some crimes or attacks. It's also make it possible for disinformation, for Russian disinformation, to be better spread on international medias like in Europe, in maybe United States. Unfortunately, I don't know much about what's happening with Russian disinformation in the United States. But in Europe, yes, if we are talking about even people who basically does not a regular audience of Russian disinformation, they read a good news media outlets, they can be affected by Russian disinformation because of these articles where both sides are asked about their position, and not everything is clear about what happened in the last situation in Ukraine.
Previously, you mentioned that Telegram became like the service, the place where misinformation, disinformation spreads a lot. Are there any tools to prevent this, or what our government should do about the situation in Telegram?
As far as I know from some meetings, that our government actually do as much as possible for any moderation in Telegram, but at this moment it's still impossible to moderate everything in Telegram. You know that Center for Countering Disinformation created a list of hostile Telegram channels, and at least each person can review this list and try not to read this channel. Even if sometimes these channels, they can be really interesting because they spread rumors, they spread the information from the presidential office, from the government that is not publicly available. It's only rumors or something that was discussed inside the office but was not published in general. Actually, it's absolutely unproven information, and sometimes just saying that something is a rumor, one can spread fakes, and no one could prove whether it's truth or fake because it's only rumors. Also, they are trying to share a kind of alternative views on what's happening in Ukraine, in Russia, in Europe, what's happening with the war. And it sounds like really something different from the official position of Ukraine, and maybe it sometimes could sound like any conspiracy theory, but that's what makes it more interesting for the broad audience. Actually, if we look on the dynamics of some anonymous Telegram channels, on the growth of their audience, during the war, their audience increased in 2-3 times. It's a really huge growth for them because we are talking about hundreds of thousands of those who read these channels. It's a huge audience that can be affected with disinformation, or at least with some fakes and misinformation. So the first thing that everyone can do on its personal level, it's not to read this channel, it's to look on this list made by Center of Countering of Disinformation and compare, isn't some of this channel is a daily news feed of any person. Also, if you read any Telegram channel and this channel is not in the list of the government, and you are not sure whether it's a disinformation channel, it's pro-Russian or it's pro-Ukrainian, you see there a kind of pro-Ukrainian news, maybe sometimes it's not really clear information, not really factual information, but in maybe 80% it's correct. Then you should maybe not stop to read this channel, but not to make your decision based on the information from this channel, because it could spread misinformation, it could spread don't checked facts. And the biggest problem with disinformation and misinformation, it's not only about the way how we think at all and what we think, it's also about which decision we are making. And if we are making wrong decisions, then we can harm not only our lives, but also the lives of our families and everyone who is closer to us. That is why if you read some channel and you cannot prove whether it's a good channel or bad, at least do not use the information from there for any decisions. Also, you can try to create a list of good Telegram channels or good medias at all, what to read on daily basis, using a wide list of Institute of Mass Information. They update it every month, and there you will find at least 10, 15 media outlets who has the highest quality of their articles, who don't spread disinformation, and who even sometimes fact check what they are doing. These media are maybe the best in Ukraine, and you can read them and be sure on 99% that you will not be affected by Russian disinformation using these channels. And of course, please use official sources. Almost each representative from government has its Telegram channels. If we talk about local authorities, they also have Telegram channels, because they understand that Telegram is now one of the most, actually the most popular social media platform among Ukrainians. It's really comfortable to use it because it has both short messages, long messages. You can use and choose any format that is most convenient for you, but it's also a good tool for propagandists to affect you. So please stay careful with what you are reading in Telegram. Use primarily official sources and the media from wide list of Institute of Mass Information.
And what do you think about TikTok? Because for me, for some time, it's a very important social service. I spend, I think, an hour a day, and sometimes I see some videos which are not trusted information. This video are disinformation, and I also see thousands of likes on this video. So when we talk about views, it's a million views. What do you think about TikTok? And are there any chances to also to stop this Russian propaganda, Russian fake news on this platform?
If we talk about TikTok, the most popular narrative there is that Russia is rebuilding Ukraine. You might see numerous videos about how Russia is fixing all destroyed buildings in Mariupol.
In Mariupol, yes, yes.
Yes, it's one of the most popular videos in TikTok right now. So it could create a wrong understanding of the whole situation, like Russia is rebuilding the city, and then only Russia could rebuild the whole Ukrainian energy system. We even see these claims right now, not only in TikTok, but in other social media platforms. So yes, to avoid so much disinformation in TikTok, maybe it's mostly about algorithms, about how this platform is working. So maybe one should try look more on Ukrainian content, on international content, and less on what Russian accounts are spreading. Actually, our team didn't look through TikTok carefully before. So we hope to do any small research about TikTok next year and look better on how this platform works, how disinformation spread there, and what to do to not meet so much disinformation. But at this stage, I would suggest that a good point is to be more concentrated and look more on the Ukrainian content, on local content, a little on international content, maybe also on some official sources. As far as I know, some officials also has their channels on TikTok. And then algorithms will show you less of propaganda and less these topics. But actually, it's not 100% guarantee that you will not meet disinformation on TikTok or somewhere else. We cannot only prey on algorithms of all social media platforms. That is why a person should know as much as possible about narratives of hostile propaganda. When you understand the main topics, the main narratives, what can Russia lie about, what Russia is trying to spread the mostly among its targeted audience, then you will understand whether you look now on the disinformation case or you look on a really truthful, factual information.
What do you think about meta services, Facebook and Instagram? Do they moderate content well? Do they fact check content well? And what about spreading misinformation in Ukraine area?
In my opinion, Meta's tools for fact-checking are maybe the most powerful in this informational war. They show the best results among other social media platforms. Of course, if we compare, for instance, with Telegram, that has absolutely no moderation. The moderation on Meta is really strong. First of all, Ukrainian fact-checkers received the access to fact-check Russian and Belarusian segments of Facebook and Instagram since the beginning of the full-scale war. That helps us to stop spreading fakes from their very beginning, from their Russian and Belarusian sources. And then we making less opportunities for these posts with disinformation to be broadly spread in Ukrainian segment. Of course, sometimes we can meet any case of disinformation, any false news, only even it's already spreading in Ukrainian segment of Facebook or Instagram. And here works better the artificial intelligence of Meta, of its fact-checking program, because look how it works. If a fact checker once rated any picture or video or piece of text as false, partly false, or altered information that can harm the audience, then Meta's artificial intelligence will add this rating and these fact checks to each the same piece of content, to each the same picture, video, or text. This tool helps to cover with fact-checking as much pieces of content as possible, as much cases of disinformation as possible. Sometimes it even helps fact-checkers to extend the geographical coverage of their fact-checks when, for instance, a friend's fact-checking organization fact-checked any picture in their segment of social media platform. And then a person in Ukraine who spread the same false picture will see the same fact-check and the same rating from this friend's organization. The same for Ukrainian. If a Ukrainian fact-checking organization checked any article, any video as false or partly false, artificial intelligence of Meta will add this fact-checking and this rating to each video or article all over Facebook or Instagram. Even if we are talking about stories in Instagram, they also can be rated by this artificial intelligence tool. So That is why I think Meta's tools for fact-checking can help us to reach the biggest coverage of our articles of fact checks. And also Meta does a lot of efforts to fight bots and trolls on its platforms. As you might know, Russian propaganda uses like fabrics of trolls and bots to affect what people think about some politicians, about some processes. But the last reviews made by Meta in summer this year, if I'm not mistaken, they shows that regular users can clarify for them whether it's bot or troll in comment, and they do not react on what this troll is doing. They do not answer it in comments, they do not like his comments, and then again, the algorithms of Meta starts working, and you cannot see these comments that is not reacted by other users in top of all comments for any post. That makes, again, the coverage of these bots and trolls less than it was expected by those who created them. This strategy in using bots and trolls are absolutely inefficient now on Meta, as it was also mentioned in their summer report.
As for me, the most complicated things is to check videos, because when someone does video properly, you think, oh, it's very trusted sources. Do you have some special tools how to check videos, or maybe you can describe the process, how you validate videos?
There may be only two pieces of advice about that. The first is to use the same tools as for fact-checking images. Like you make a screenshot of some part of the video and trying to search it in Google Images, Yandex Images. You can use Yandex if you are almost sure that it came from Russian segment. Microsoft Bing and other tools for fact-checking images. In maybe 80% of cases, it might help you to verify whether the video is okay, whether it has no changes, and is it used in the right context, because sometimes propaganda use videos out of context. They say that something happening somewhere, but if you start this search only using the screenshot, you will see that it's an old video that was created years before. The other advice is to only be really to pay a lot of attention to the details. Sometimes these tools with search in Google Images and so on doesn't work. It's the rest 20% of cases, and you should just be really careful to details. I could describe it on one of the last example which I worked on. It was a video spread after the first massive attack on Ukrainian energy infrastructure after 10th of October. And on this video was empty shops in Kiev with absolutely no products there, only some bottles of sweet water, and that's all. The statements under this video was that it was recorded now in Kiev on 10th of October. I tried this search using screenshots from this video and find nothing. That is why I started to analyze details from this video. I mentioned that prices of products were too low to what we see now in shops. Also, I identified that it's it was ATB. I know this shop very well, so I identified it just using my experience of shopping. And then what I did, I compared prices on ATB market now and the prices that was on the end of February, because my assumption was that it was an old video recorded on the end of February when people really were scared of what's happening, and it was like a short deficit of some products in some supermarkets, including Kyiv. So I compared the prices and I saw that these prices are really closer to what was in February than to the these prices that we had in October when this video was spreading. That is why I make I summarized that this video is old. It was not recorded now in October. The aim of this video was to make people panic, to make them go to the shop and buy everything they see, like to make them panic again. And when people are panicked, they cannot make correct decisions. Again, what I was talking about, disinformation is about how we are making decisions. So watching this video, people might be scared, they might go to shops, buy everything they see, and do not listen to what officials says at all, because the situation is much worse than on TV is talking about. I saw also another way to fact check. It was much easier to go to the nearest ATB and check whether everything is good there. And you might ask, why did you do so difficult things like comparing of prices in October and February when you could just go to the nearest ATB and check whether everything is good there? But, you know, if everything is good in ATB near my house, if everything is good in other shops in my district, actually, I don't know whether is everything good in other district. I don't know whether is everything good, for instance, in the Akademgorodok or any other district of Kyiv. So if I would check this video in this way, I would like manipulate with audience with what only I see. It was not a broad picture of what's happening really in Kyiv. That is why it's really was better to use these details in this video to show that it was spread absolutely out of context.
Last two questions. We talked about misinformation, disinformation from Russia propaganda in Ukraine, Europe. What about Russia? In your opinion, is it possible somehow to to help people in Russia, for Russians to understand that propaganda from their media, from their governments, it's disinformation?
Actually, I'm not sure that it's possible. I know that our government and many NGOs, they are trying so much to reach Russian audience with clear fact-checking information, with official information, and trying to prove them that their government makes this genocide in Ukraine, makes all these atrocities and war crimes. But as far as I saw, it doesn't work, unfortunately. In Vox, we tried to do the same at the very beginning of the full-scale war. We created some videos, we created infographics, we were trying to target them on Russian audience, but all that we received were angry comments, were claims, and our posts were banned then and even blocked and deleted from social media platforms. That is why we decided not to target Russian audience again and be mostly concentrated on Ukrainian and European audience. Also, we hope to work more with European audience next year. And I think that Russian audience, unfortunately, firstly, it's a kind zombied by propaganda for years, not for the last 8 years since Russia occupied east of Ukraine and Crimea, but for tens of years since Ukraine became independent. Also, another point that there is almost no opportunity for Russian audience to reach factual information, not only about Ukraine, at all about what's happening in the world. You know, there is no much good news media outlets in Russia. I would even say there is absolutely no good medias. Someone can mention Medusa, but unfortunately, sometimes Medusa also spreads Russian narratives. Medusa uses our AIN.UA as source of information about Ukraine. It's nothing about good journalism at all if we are talking about how to affect Russian audience from those kinds of medias. You know that some social media platforms are restricted in Russia. Everything that is Western, that is international, is connected with something bad for Russian audience. That is why I see almost no opportunities to change something in Russians' minds. I suppose that these people, they are like absolutely okay with Putin's totalitarianism, with the situation they live in, and maybe it's better for them not to fight for everything at all and just live their poor lives and watch what's happening in Ukraine with or no emotions, or only with thinking that it's a good way to continue this war. I only think that there will be like a kind of justice for Russia, for Russian government in the very nearest future, and they will be kind of punished for all these crimes made for the last 10 months of this war.
In my opinion, there is a war between disinformation and truth, and I think this war is endless because it's impossible to win with deepfakes, disinformation. Even like presidents of the countries like Trump, like Orban, sometimes use disinformation and spread this fake news. What about you? What is your opinion in this?
I have a really bad forecast for the times after our victory. I suppose that we will see the increase of politicians' populism because they will have to fight for their audience again. That is why they will suggest any absolutely wrong decisions for Ukraine. They will try to stop reforms again, to stop those laws and decisions that could improve our economic growth and development and our remodernization after our victory, just to say what people want to hear. For instance, if we come back to the times before the full-scale war, they will promise to decrease the payment for our home utilities, for gas, for water, for electricity. They will promise to increase pensions payments for 2, 3, 4 times, even if it's impossible for our state budget. They will promise to decrease all taxes for all types of business, again, even if it's impossible for our budget. I suppose that even some politicians can repeat again that we should stop this like our affection from our addiction from international help, for international financial support. again, even if it's so much needed for us, for our reforms. If we will look through the reforms, some politicians would suggest to not implement medical reform, land reform, decentralization, any other kind of reforms that were implemented since 2015, just to say what some people want to hear. That is why I forecast that we will see and hear all this populism after our victory, and it will be our new focus of what to do if we will have less Russian propaganda or no Russian propaganda at all, because there will be no Russia at all. Then we should be concentrated on what our politicians say. We should fact check them, and we also should improve the media literacy, fact-checking skills, and the general education of our audience to understand whether some politicians manipulate with them or they are saying truth.
Thank you for this conversation. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I was glad to talk to you also. Thank you for all these questions. I also hope that it was really useful and interesting for our audience.
Thanks to Ilya and Svitlana for field conversation, really cool. And I'm very appreciate for your support, both of you as an experts who will participate at our hackathon as a mentors, less than 1 month in Warsaw. For all listeners, I remind you that you can write down your questions in the comments under the broadcast. And also today with me is Denis Gursky, who is a Social Boost's head of board, and he shares our vision and the origins of the idea of 1991 Media Hackathon, and while we connecting and integrating our tech solutions in this sector. So Denis, the screen is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Ilya and Svitlana, for having this conversation. That was very interesting and insightful. We are very glad to hear those insights that you provided, because obviously we know some things, but hearing this from the practitioner side is very useful. So indeed, in January 2023, we are organizing the hackathon in Warsaw, and this is going to be the technical event, which is mostly focused on matching together two different audiences, mostly those who are doing coding and those who are doing the disinformation. The idea comes from the fact that a lot of professionals moved to Poland since the war started, and basically they sometimes are a bit disconnected from what's happening in Ukraine. At the same time, Ukraine has a lot of expertise and basically can provide a lot of insights about how to fight disinformation to the rest of the world. And so far, the event was supported by NATO Stratcom Center of Excellence. We have speakers from OSCE, Polish and Ukrainian government, from Strategic Center of Communications from Ukraine, and also a lot of startup organizations in Poland. So the idea is that basically the teams that participate from Ukraine will join mostly online because we understand the situation, but at the same time, they will be very much supported by donors such as USAID and others after the event. So basically for donors, this is an event to see what kind of teams operate in Ukraine and how they can interact with the European audience. So the event is split into several streams, and we will be mostly looking into people who know how to do strategic communications, how to do real-time data monitoring, how to tap into open data sources and basically determine the source of the news. And also we will have a lot of representatives from Facebook or Meta and from Google. So it was mentioned during the conversation that Facebook has one of the most advanced mechanisms to verify and moderate news. So basically, this is what is going to be happening there. Facebook and Google are providing mentors who will be working with the teams who want to dig deeper and want to work with the Ukrainian narratives or have different ideas, because both Facebook and Google are looking for interesting teams to work with. So we will be doing the matchmaking between Facebook and Google teams as well. And last but not the least, we will have a lot of interesting people from both Ukraine and Europe participating, who will share experience, make new professional connections and friends. And the event will not be super big. We are trying to keep it under 100 people. So basically everyone will have a chance to meet everyone. So if you are interested, you can basically have more information following the link, which I just dropped in the chat, and always reach out to us. And the registration is still on. I think it will be still on for a couple of weeks. And the event is physically happening in Poland. If you are able to make it, it will be taking place at Google for Startups campus, which is a very nice area, similar to Levy Bereg, Kyiv. And basically, it's a very interesting location with a lot of other things happening there. If you're not able to travel because of some restrictions and martial law in Ukraine, you can always participate online, and we will be able to put you in touch with the people who want to speak at the event. Oksana will be leading kind of the things related to the online. So if you have any questions related to this one, you can always ask her. And Jane is the key person about the contents of the event. So if you're interested to join as a mentor, maybe, for example, if you're more senior, then please reach out. If you don't have a team, you can always participate as an individual and actually meet your future team at the event. And if you just want to come and listen, on the day one, on January 20, we have a mini conference with high-level speakers from NATO, OSCE, Polish, Ukrainian government, Google, and Facebook speaking. So you can just join, ask questions, and just basically enjoy the conversation rather than the entire hackathon event. This is all from my side. If you have any questions, please ask, raise your hand, or drop a question into the chat. If there aren't any, then I'm giving the mic back to Jane. Oh, there's a question. I don't see your name. I just see it says News US, but for the sake of finding out what the teams are, the teams will be actually formed finally at the actual event. So January 20 mini conference, January 21, 22nd is the actual hackathon event. And on the day one, the teams will be split into streams, and they will be talking to each other and form the teams actually at the location and both online. So this is a hybrid event, and the teams will be formed both from online and offline participants. So probably during the event, you will be able to see what the teams are, or on the second day of the hackathon, which is January 22, there will be a judging session, and teams will be presenting what they have achieved over the course of a couple of days. And you'll be able to see the actual stream and see those presentations and see what the teams are. I hope this answers the question. Any other questions?
We have no question in our broadcast too. So maybe if someone will have any comments or questions or propositions, you may do that after our stream to the webpage or to the mails for Social Boost and 9091. So we'll be glad to answer all your questions even after that. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot, and see you in Warsaw or at our next broadcasts.